next step will be. The United Nations, the international community putting forth a definitive plan of action. We might hear some wording in this statement of what they're planning, but it's not as though we expect at the end of this meeting they're saying, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Most likely within that statement there'll be something along the lines of a fact-finding mission, or there needs to be more reports from on the ground as to what exactly the United Nations can do for the situation in Libya.
A fact-finding mission sounds like a very UN response to a situation that many would regard as much, much more serious, Scott. What about the broader picture? I mean, President Obama thus far silent on this issue and not really putting his point of view forward as yet. What's the mood in the US media and the US public? Are they seeing this as being a particularly important issue for the presidency?
It is a very important issue, and obviously with American perspective, yes, the president coming out and saying something. But as we're hearing from my colleague Patty Culhane in Washington, that for this situation, unlike what we saw and how vocal President Obama was when things were happening in Egypt, because of the close ties with the United States, there was a different tone. Here, it probably will be channeled through the U.S. State Department, because that's a much more appropriate venue, if you will, for statements from the administration to come through on a nation like Libya, where they don't really have good relations. If I can add one more thing, there's a very interesting subject with the Secretary General's conversation with Muammar Gaddafi yesterday morning. We're getting a little bit more information from his spokesman today. He said that you can kind of read in between the lines here, but based on that speech we just heard Gaddafi give in the last hour or so, the spokesman said the conversation that Ban Ki-moon and Gaddafi had yesterday morning was similarly epic. He said he wouldn't go into details as to what Colonel Gaddafi was saying, but you can kind of read between the lines. It was probably similar to the speech we heard, the hour-plus speech we just heard in the last couple of minutes.
All right, Scott Heidler live in New York. Thanks for that. We'll join you again when we have some comment from the United Nations and the Security Council meeting there. Meanwhile, the most immediate and important reaction is of the people of Libya. We obviously have very restricted access to those people in Libya, thanks to Muammar Gaddafi, but we do have access to some of the people who are trying to get out. One of the busiest points in Libya right now is on the borders. Jamal El-Shail is at Saloum in Egypt, near that Libyan border. He's been with some Libyan people and listening to the speech and getting some reaction. Jamal, how did this go down where you are?
Well, Taimur, the reaction has been one of outrage and utter shock from a people who have already seen a lot of horrific images in the past few days. Speaking to some of those who were listening, there's a cafe just on the side that was playing the speech of Gaddafi, and they were saying this is essentially Gaddafi coming out and threatening massacre. The words of Ibada, genocide in Arabic, the words of Tathir Arqi, the words of ethnic cleansing. This is what was being said by those watching those words coming out of Gaddafi. In fact, these are mainly Egyptians who are fleeing the violence and who are showing huge sympathy with what they say has been already acts of, as one person put it to me, barbarism by those who have been supporting Gaddafi. They've told me of stories of helicopter gunships being used indiscriminately, densely populated civilian areas. They've told me about African mercenaries hired by Gaddafi to enter Libyan homes, as well as Egyptians who have been a scapegoat by Gaddafi, as we heard in his speech, and prior to that by his son a few days ago, as trying to instigate a copycat revolution, as we saw here in Egypt a few weeks ago. So the general message, at least by those who have been able to come out of Libya, is one of shock, of horror, of anger, and above all, disappointment with an international community they say that has let them down. A lot of people here say they've been stranded for several weeks now. Oh, sorry, several days now, and it was only in the past 12 hours that they were able to leave.
Jamal, as you're standing on the border there, Libyan state television, let me tell you, is broadcasting pictures of a crowd that is carrying pro-Gaddafi posters, pictures, statements, lots of activity, it would seem. I have no idea where these pictures come from, whether they're occurring live now, but I'm sure they're probably not reflected amongst the people. That emotion that we're seeing there is not reflected amongst the people that you're dealing with on that border. The speech of Gaddafi aside, tell us what the people that are coming through now have been saying and what the general mood is where you are. Is there a sense that that border is going to become a very busy place soon?
Already it is busy. I mean, just a couple of hours ago, the number of Egyptians and others who fled through this border had reached 16,000, and that was just within the past 24 hours. There are up to 1 million Egyptian expatriates who work or live in Egypt, and the Egyptian government is very keen on stressing it is doing its utmost in order to try and evacuate them. However, obviously, the limitations imposed by Gaddafi in terms of allowing landing space and other licenses to people who are trying to evacuate their citizens is making that hugely difficult. Having said that, a lot of the people who are leaving here, obviously, as you can hear, there's some clapping behind me. People are very relieved that they've left, but a lot of the ones I've spoken to are actually disappointed because they say they feel like they would have wanted to do more to help those who they call their Libyan brothers. Well, in terms of help, the Egyptian non-governmental organizations here and many doctors, over 100, have already crossed the border into Libya with much needed aid, with a lot of blood supplies. There have been huge pleas on calls from hospitals, particularly in Benghazi, which was saw the brunt of a lot of this violence in the past few days, for more medical aid and supplies to come. And the Egyptians here have definitely tried to heed that call, but obviously Egypt itself is in some sort of political turmoil, which is making everything that much more complicated. Taimur.
Jamal Al-Shal, on the border of Egypt and Libya, thank you for the moment. Let's bring you back to the studio for a moment for a few more words with our guest here, Ibrahim Sharia from the Brookings Doha Centre. The situation with potential refugees is an interesting one. Jamal was there on the border. Yeah. Is there a sense that people may well choose to use that border crossing as an escape route?
Well, there is a strong possibility that there will be large-scale refugees leaving, not only foreigners but also from Libya, because the situation is very alarming. The situation is on the escalation mode, and it will continue to go like this.
I mean, the reason I ask the question is because the sense that people would rather flee than fight is going to be an important question in the balance of how this thing swings, isn't it?
There will always be, in a similar situation, people will be split. You will find people who will continue to find, and you will find especially the vulnerable communities, you know, women, children, they will escape to, safe zones. And we have seen, this is not only in Libya and all over the world. Whenever there is a war, whenever there is escalation, we should expect to see refugees and so. Let's keep in mind that Libya with the access that it has to Egypt and to Tunisia, and Egypt and Tunisia now are considered safe places. So we should expect to see that refugees in these two countries coming from Libya, as we have seen most of the international foreigners are in Libya are leaving already.
Let me just tell you one thing that we're hearing from our colleagues at AlJazeera Arabic. Yes. The Arab League has been meeting, as you know, and the word that we're getting from AlJazeera Arabic is that the League has decided it will suspend Libya from meeting